Please.
Thank you, Martin. We appreciate your hustling up here. You got here pretty quick.
I needed my exercise. All right, so I'll be presenting the budget for the Board of Indigent Defense Services. First page, general overview of the operating expenditures, agency overview. I'd like to begin, well, first go to page 4, identify the performance measures, which were identified by the agency and the governor's office. Following that, you'll have some historical trends. And then on page 7, we will begin with FY 2021. At the bottom of the page, the agency estimates revised expenditures of $35.4 million, including $34.8 million from the SGF. This is an all funds decrease of $3.3 million, or 8.4%, and an SGF decrease of $3.3 million, or 8.6%. Below the FY21 approved amount, the SGF decrease is primarily attributable to elapsed funds from the 2020 reappropriated funds in the amount of $3.4 million. Page 7. The revised estimate includes special revenue fund increase of $11,472, or 1.9% above the FY21 approved amount. This increase is attributable to the fee fund carry forward from the Indigent Defense Services Fee Fund and the In-Service Education Fee Fund. The revised estimate includes 200.8 FTE positions, which is a 1.1 FTE position above the 21 approved number. Now, this is due to an accounting system error, which included classified temporary positions as FTE positions. If you turn the page to page 8, middle of the page, we have the governor's recommendation. The governor recommends expenditures of $32.4 million. This includes $31.7 million from the SGF. This is an all funds decrease of $3 million, or 8.4%, and an SGF decrease of $3.1 million, or 9% below the agency's 21 revised estimate. The decrease is due to the governor's recommendation, a reduction to the assigned counsel program of $3 million based on the fall 2020 assigned counsel caseload projection. In addition, the governor only recommends part of the agency's supplemental requests, including $147,141, all SGF, for the IT security. The recommendation includes 199.7 FTE positions, and this addresses the 1.1 FTE positions that were misclassified in their request. And with that, I'll stand for FY21.
Any questions for 2021? Seeing none, please proceed.
All right, thank you. Right below that, you'll have the agency supplemental request. At the bottom of the page, the agency requests $267,141 from the SGF to fund their IT, security, and remote working equipment. On the following page, you'll have a breakdown of each of these requests. So for the IT security, the agency requests $147,141 to address the issues that were identified in the May 2019 security audit conducted by the Kansas Legislative Division of Post Audit. The request addresses the items that the agency has deemed to require immediate attention. These items include equipment upgrades, safety equipment, structural changes to the offices, and additional security measures, and those are listed out below. The second bullet point, the laptop computers. This is a request of $120,000 for the procurement of additional 60 laptop computers to maintain remote working capabilities. And this is due to COVID-19. There's a small little bullet below that the agency requested the equipment as part of a coronavirus relief fund operational expenditure. And the application process through the Office of Recovery and the Department of Administration and the funding approvals are decided after the budget submission. The governor recommended the IT supplement, all for security measures. It is my understanding that the agency did receive the funding for those laptops from the CRF. Below that, we have the governor's allotments. These allotments adjust a total of $346,854. On the following page, you'll have a little breakdown. It's all from CABR's death and disability. And I'll stand for questions.
Questions? Seeing none? Thank you.
Chairman. So to begin FY 2022, towards the bottom of the page, the agency requests $51.5 million, including $50.9 million from the SGF. This is an all funds increase of $16.1 million or 45.4%, and an SGF increase of $16.1 million or 46.3% above the FY 21 revised estimate. The increase is primarily due to the agency's enhancement requests for funding to cover upgrades for technology, assigned counsel rate increases, a case management system, and staffing enhancements. The request includes 294.8 FTE positions, which is an increase of 94 FTE positions above the 21 approved number. The increase is entirely due to the agency's caseload staffing enhancements request. On the following page, towards the middle and the top, the governor recommends the expenditures of $38.2 million, including $37.6 million from the SGF. The SGF decrease of $13.3 million or 26.1% below the agency's request. The decrease is attributable to the governor only recommending in part the agency's enhancement requests, $4.1 million, all SGF for recruiting and retention. The decrease is also attributable to the governor recommending part of the agency's reduced resource packages. These decreases are partially offset due to an increase of $342,983 for assigned counsel caseload estimates. The recommendation includes 199.7 FTE positions, which is 95.1 FTE positions below the agency's request. The decrease in FTE positions is due to the governor not recommending the enhancements to include the 94 FTE positions for staffing, and the correction for a technical error that count temporary positions as FTE positions. And I'll stand for questions on the
Questions? Seeing none?
All right, thank you.
Proceed.
Below that, we have the breakdown of the enhancements. The agency requests $16.0 million fall from SGF for enhancements for funding for FY 2022. The enhancement requests are detailed below. You'll have the ethical caseload staffing request. The agency requests $7 million, all from SGF for 94 FTE positions. This is to address the chronic attorney caseload issues and insufficient support staffing. There's a further breakdown below that. If you could turn the page. I will jump to the next black bullet point, the immediate recruitment and retention. The agency requests $4.1 million, all from the SGF, to adjust for the pay parity with prosecutors and other comparable government employees, and to establish an internal formal training program for public defenders and assigned counsel. That request is broken down in the following two bullet points. Below that, you have their third request for enhancement, the assigned counsel rate increase. The agency requests $3.6 million, all from the SGF fund, for assigned counsel rate increase to up to $100 per hour. The agency's board approved this increase to an hourly rate to assigned counsel of $100 per hour for FY 2022. This is dependent on appropriated funds and statutory amendments. And the current rate is currently at $80 an hour, and there are a few exceptions. The next enhancement request is for the IT security remote working equipment request. This is the same as what was in FY 21. So you see the same amount of this agency requests $467 to $141, all from SGF. The request is identical to the FY 21 supplement request, except for here we have an addition of a case management request, and that is broken down below that, following onto the next page. And the governor, in the middle of the page, on page 13, the governor recommends the $4.1 million, all from the SGF, for the agency's enhancement request for the retention and recruitment. And I'll stand for questions on the enhancements.
Are there any questions? Senator Pag?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The number of employees that you guys had requested versus what was there, that's a big number. What happens in a caseload when you don't cover it?
according to the agency staffing, if they can't cover a caseload with their current staff.
Yeah.
Depending on the situation, it will be contracted out to an assigned counsel, either through contract or through an hourly rate that has been established.
It is handled somewhere. It's just passed on.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
And the agency, I'm sure, can clarify if I am off on that.
Do you have a question, Senator Petty?
I suspect it's somewhere in this packet, but I know this has been an area that there's been year to year requests for increase in staffing, and the same thing with the hourly rate. Do you recall, was this $100 hourly rate new this year, or is it just a continuation of?
Per statute, there's still a limit of $80 per hour. So the board has approved to go above that, but that would require legislative action to amend the current statute to allow it to go up to that amount.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Martin. I appreciate it.
Not a problem. Below that, bottom of the page, you'll have the 2022 reduced resources. So the agency submitted a reduced resource budget totaling $3.5 million, all from the SGF for FY22. The agency makes note that this would result in reduced staff hours, which would include furloughs, layoffs, and elimination of unfilled positions, along with the holding of assigned counsel claims. So the governor recommends partially adopting the agency's reduced resources package, and in the chart, you can see that she adopted the assigned counsel funding. And I'll stand for questions on that.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you.
All right, thank you. The remaining budget analysis includes their funding sources and a breakdown of their programs by detail. If you would like me to go into those, I can, but that's just a further breakdown of their operating expenditures per their programs.
Any other explanation on the charts? Seeing none, I think we're okay, Martin.
Thank you, Chairman. That'll conclude my overview of their budget.
Thank you, appreciate it. Okay, next we'll have Heather Cessna, Executive Director of Bids. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you very much, Chairman and members of the committee, for having me here today. I appreciate you taking the time, and now that you've had a chance to absorb some of the sticker shock, I wanted to start off by giving a little bit of background information for why we're here with the request that we're here with, because I think it's important that you have a little bit of the history and that you understand why we've made the strategic requests that we've made. First of all, I was going to give you an overview of our problems, talk a little bit about our proposed solutions, and then I can certainly stand for questions, and I know there's probably a couple I need to address pretty quickly at the end of my presentation to start off with. First of all, the issues that our agency is facing are high caseloads, a lack of pay parity and other compensation issues, and a lack of sufficient staffing and other basic resources, all of which have been further exacerbated by COVID-19. Essentially, our public defense system is very much at a breaking point at this point in time. And the thing that you need to remember before we go any further in a conversation about our budget is that BIDS's problems are not just BIDS's problems. 85% of all adult felony charges in the state of Kansas require appointed counsel, and the Board of Indigent Defense provides all of those appointed counsel, either through the public defender system or through our appointed counsel program. And so our agency's issues have an outsized impact on all of our district courts and our appellate courts across the state of Kansas, because those cases can't move in those criminal courts if they don't have a public defender or an assigned counsel there next to them when the case is moving forward. In fiscal year, just to give you a better idea of the size of that problem, in fiscal year 2020, our agency handled 26,000 237 cases, and that's a significant decrease from what a normal year looks like. A normal year is closer to 29,000 cases, and that's partially because of the fall off of cases moving through the system very quickly because of court-related shutdowns as a result of the pandemic. What that breaks down to in fiscal year 2020 was that our public defenders handled 11,456 cases, and our assigned counsel handled 14,781. So that's basically 44% to the public defender side and 56% to the assigned counsel side. And we have a number of public defender offices throughout the state. We certainly don't cover every place, and where we don't have public defenders offices, we have assigned counsel that serve as our main public defense delivery system. However, even in the areas where we have public defenders offices, we have assigned counsel or contract counsel that still serve as backups to those public defenders to handle conflicts cases and overloads. So one of the questions that was asked right up front was what happens if we don't have enough staffing in our public defenders offices? Well, those cases then get offloaded to our assigned counsel program. The problem with that is that our assigned counsel program regularly costs more than if those same cases were kept in our public defenders offices. In fiscal year 2020, that cost difference was $175 more per case that it costs the state of Kansas to pay for those cases when they get offloaded from our public defenders to our assigned counsel. In past years, that difference has been even higher. In 2019, I believe it was closer to $282 a difference. The only reason why that has gone down is in part because we have had to keep our public defenders offices refusing cases due to our high caseloads for longer periods of time this year. So our public defenders are typically much more economical as far as state finances are concerned. And I wanted to talk in detail about our caseloads because this really is our defining problem. Our most immediate problem is our caseloads. And one of the things you have to understand is that there are national standards that are set to say that there is an absolute maximum cap on the number of cases an attorney should handle in a given year of no more than 150 cases on felony cases. And the reason for that is obvious. And that's because there are a number of problems that come with high caseloads. For us, it's a recruitment problem. It deters people from joining our agency when our caseloads are too high. It's also a retention issue. I mean, obviously, when you're overloaded with cases and it makes it difficult for us to recruit new people to the agency. It makes it difficult to recruit new people to our assigned counsel program as well. One of the recent surveys that we did of our agency determined that even though 81% of our public defense employees reported that they came to our agency specifically because they believe in the work that we do, 55% of those people also reported that within the last year, they had considered leaving our public defender's offices specifically because of high caseloads and lack of pay parity. So we're literally driving mission-driven employees away from our agency because of our high caseloads. Our high caseloads are also an effectiveness issue. Obviously, when you have too many cases and not enough time to work those cases, you're not going to be able to do all the things that you need to do in order to provide good, effective assistance of counsel. And that's one of the other reasons why high caseloads are an ethical issue. The Kansas Rules of Professional Conduct for Attorneys, Rule 1.3 on diligence, comment 1, explicitly says that a lawyer's workload has to be controlled so that each matter can be handled adequately. And that's one of the reasons why when we have too high of caseloads, there's a number of down the line expensive consequences for the state, from everything from viable claims of ineffective assistance of counsel, wrongful conviction lawsuits, legal malpractice claims, ethics investigations, and the like. And ultimately that ends up being a Sixth Amendment problem with potential for protracted and expensive litigation over the constitutional adequacy of our system as a whole. And of course, most importantly for us, those high caseloads keep us from being able to provide our core agency mission, which is to provide a zealous and effective criminal defense to our clients. I wanted to talk a little bit about caseloads And I included in your written testimony a chart. That chart is trial public defender average caseloads for fiscal year 2020 for our 11 public defender offices. That's a good question. Let me find your page number for you. Page 3, she said, yes. Yes. What you'll see on that breakdown are the 11 trial public defender offices that we have, and their average number of cases divided by the number of active attorneys over the course of fiscal year 2020. Now keep that 150 absolute maximum caseload limit in mind. You will notice that 8 of those 11 offices exceeded that number by a substantial amount in most cases. Of the 3 that did not, even those that did not had to pay a price to do so. For example, at the top of that list is our 3rd judicial public defender, which is our main public defender office here in Topeka. That office came in right at 150 cases per attorney per year for fiscal year 2020, but they were only able to do so because they refused new cases for 172 days in fiscal year 2020, which is almost 47% of the year. So it took them refusing cases for almost half the year in order to stay below that limit, because they just don't have enough staffing to be able to handle those cases. Now you compare that with our Sedgwick County Public Defender's Office in Wichita, which is our main public defender in Wichita. That office was averaging 278 cases per attorney, which is obviously substantially higher than the 150 caseload cap. It is also unsurprising that that office in particular in fiscal year 2020 had some of our highest turnover rates, and primarily because of caseload as well as other issues. Our average across our trial public defenders for fiscal year 2020 was 205 cases per attorney per year, which is 55 cases above the absolute maximum. So, and this is one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, because the question is, what does that mean then when we say our average is 205 cases? Well, when you break that down by the number of hours that you have in a given week to work those cases, that works out to an average of approximately 10 hours per case per year. That's unacceptable under any standard of professional ethics. For comparison, a recent study of Louisiana public defender caseloads came up and said that for low-level felonies, in order to have reasonably effective assistance of counsel, you needed to spend 20 hours on those low-level felonies and closer to 200 hours on the high-level sentences without life parole, or life sentences without parole cases. And we're averaging 10 hours on everything from low-level felonies up to hard 50 life sentences. One of the things that you have to realize is that we don't have any control over the number of cases that come into our system. It's not like we're the Department of Transportation, and if we don't have money to pay for a road this year, we can just not build the road and see if we have the money next year. We don't have any control over that. The legislature obviously gets to decide what things to criminalize and what crimes to make felonies. Prosecutors get to exercise prosecutorial discretion over what cases to charge, what cases to divert, and which charges to include in any given case. And obviously, we don't have any control over the crime rates that happen on any given year as well. So we don't have a way to stop the influx of cases into our system. And those cases, when they come into our system, have to go somewhere. And that goes back to the question that you had about, if public defenders can't accept those cases, where do those cases go? Well, those cases go to our assigned counsel program. So let's talk a little bit about our assigned counsel program. Right now, we are paying our statutory rate of $80 per hour. A 2017 KBA study determined that the average per hour rate of counsel in Kansas was approximately $225 per hour, which means that our $80 per hour statutory rate is 64% below the going market rate for private counsel. And the problem with that low hourly rate is that it makes it difficult for us to recruit enough people to our panels, and especially enough people who are experienced doing high-level cases to our assigned counsel panels, because it's just not paying them well enough for their time. It also creates a problem because it incentivizes private counsel to take more cases than they really should in order to cover their overhead costs and to make ends meet. And it has also been statistically shown to incentivize private counsel to go to trial less frequently because the low rate of pay means that a plea is actually paid better for the time spent on it than a jury trial is. Unfortunately, our pay issues obviously do not just extend to our assigned counsel. They also involve our public defender's offices. Despite national standards that call for parity of resources between prosecutors and public defenders, our public defenders are consistently paid significantly less than their prosecutor counterparts. And this is true even though starting salaries are often relatively comparable. What happens is once you gain a little bit of experience, prosecutor salaries quickly outpace public defenders. And so what happens is when we did a study in Kansas and looked at prosecutor salaries across Kansas, particularly comparing areas where we had comparable public defender's offices in the same jurisdiction, we found that when comparing our top paid public defenders in several of those cities where there were comparable prosecutors' offices, that the top paid public defenders were paid, or top paid prosecutors were paid anywhere from 23% to 50% more than our top paid public defenders. And that parity issue isn't just related to prosecutors, it's also related to other comparable government defender salaries. For example, here in Topeka, our top paid public defenders with 25 to 35 years of experience and as head supervisors of their individual offices make a salary comparable to what an assistant federal defender with the 0 to 3 years of experience can make one block down the street from our public defender's office. So it's no wonder that we have both a recruitment and retention problem in our agency. If our caseloads weren't enough to deter people from working for us, certainly our pay scale issues also are. We also suffer from a lack of other problems, though, as well. One of the issues that we have is that we don't have a lot of leeway within our agency budget to be able to make adjustments when we need to make it. And that's primarily because 93% of our budget is either salaries for our public defender and operational costs or assigned counsel payments that are for work that's already been completed. So there's not a lot of room for us to be able to react if we do need to add more positions out of what we currently have. We are also, under-resourced in this, our staffing, both for our public defenders and our support staff for our public defenders' offices. We are also staffed for our administrative office. We lack a training division, which is relatively uncommon for public defender offices across the United States because you have a very specialized area of law that you need to constantly update all of your public defenders, all of your public defense staff, and all of your assigned counsel with on an ongoing regular basis. So that's pretty unusual that we don't have that, and that's definitely something that we notice have been lacking and plays into some of our recruitment and retention issues because our attorneys and our support staff and our assigned counsel don't feel like they're sufficiently supported. We also lack basic infrastructure, frequently struggling to avoid things like servers, phone equipment, computer equipment, and legal resources. We still operate our assigned counsel program on a paper voucher system by hand, and we do not have a modern case management system, all due to a lack of funding for these items. Now that I told you all the bad news, I will tell you that one of the reasons why we're here having this conversation today is because these were problems that we knew we had last year, and we spent quite a bit of time with our budget committees last year, both in the House and here in the Senate, talking about what our problems were. And there was a clear sense from the conversations that we were having at that time that what the legislature wanted to see was no longer the sorts of Band-Aids that I think our agency had been coming to the legislature with over the course of years. What we were asked for was to take a hard look at what our problems were and to try to come up with a master plan for how we can address these issues on a permanent, ongoing basis in a way that can potentially give the state the best opportunity to provide sufficient representation in the Sixth Amendment while also essentially having the biggest bang for your buck. And So what we did was we created our staffing report that we submitted to the Legislative Budget Committee last September, which I also included a link to in your written testimony because it goes into far more extensive overview on how we got to some of our solutions than what I'm going to be able to spend time on today. But there's a lot of information there if you want to dig down into some of the weeds on these issues. But ultimately, what the overview of that is that we need to invest in our public defense system. And that investment needs to probably be primarily focused on bolstering up our actual public defenders' offices. And there's a variety of reasons for that. Public defenders are able to provide more independence and better oversight, have better caseload controls than our assigned counsel side of things. They are able to do a team-based approach, which provides for a much better cost-effective use of resources. They're also able to do a lot of that mentoring and training in-house, which makes better use of resources. And they're able to be a much more centralized and institutionalized organization that helps also aid with the prosecutor's offices and the court system in providing better criminal justice outcomes, because you have like a single point of contact in an area as opposed to having to coordinate amongst a lot of individual solo practitioners who are acting as assigned counsel. So there's a variety of cost savings that can be had there. One of the other things that we discovered as we were going through and doing all of this research is that there really is this national movement towards a more holistic, client-centered defense. And I definitely provided some information in there. I believe I shared a study from the RAND Corporation and the University of Pennsylvania School of Law with the administrative assistant for the committee that looks at holistic defense practices. And what this is basically a defense practice that looks at treating the client and not just the individual case in a way that ultimately provides better outcomes. And the interesting thing about this study that the University of Pennsylvania School of Law and the RAND Corporation did on holistic defense in the Bronx was that they were able to prove statistically, which I think most defense practitioners would be able to tell you this anecdotally, but this study in particular was able to, over the course of 10 years, statistically prove that holistic defense in that situation was able to prevent more than 1 million days of incarceration. They were able to reduce the likelihood of a prison sentence by 16%. They were able to reduce the actual prison sentence lengths by 24%. They were able to save taxpayers an estimated $160 million in inmate housing costs. And in spite of higher pre- and post-trial release rates, 10 years after case resolution, the defendants who received holistic representation in that study committed no more crimes than those who were incarcerated for longer periods of time. So in other words, they were able to prove that holistic defense was statistically proven to be able to significantly reduce incarceration and save taxpayer dollars at the same time as not harming public safety. And that's one of the reasons why nationally, defense systems from New York to Kentucky to Texas are embracing this holistic defense model. We believe that we can do that here in Kansas by shoring up our foundations that are crumbling right now and moving to that more holistic defense, so that as the state does have to continue to investing in public defense, that you're getting a bigger bang for your buck, not just in our agency, but across the entire criminal legal system. And so I wanted to talk about that in just a little bit of detail.
Excuse me, Heather,
Yes.
we're running late,
Okay.
and if you could condense this a little, I think that there's another proponent that would like to speak before we run out of time here.
Absolutely. So
Thank you.
I will just throw out a couple of last minute thoughts here. One of the things that I wanted to point out was when I talk about ways for our agency to save money, if we're better staffing our caseloads and we're better using those resources by putting that money into our public defense system up front. One of the things that we looked at was a variety of success metrics that we could use to be able to report back to the legislature. One of those success metrics happens to be the number of days or time saved. What that's talking about is, for instance, in fiscal year 2020, we had just over 26,000 cases. If through better staffing and more aggressive advocacy and better managed caseloads, we were able to save just 10% of those cases, 10 days in prison each, we could save the state over $1.8 million just in inmate housing costs alone on that relatively small example of what we can do with that money. It's not a direct one-to-one savings, but it helps illustrate for you the kind of down-the-line cost savings for the entire criminal legal system that funding public defense upfront can help you with. And that's based on looking at KDOC's daily housing costs for inmates. Just to sum it up, the governor has given us a recommendation of an additional, for fiscal year 2022, an additional $4.1 million, which we very much appreciate. I know that what we asked for this year is a very large number compared to what we traditionally have asked for and compared to what, certainly, a lot of the other agencies are even able to ask for, given all of the other constraints on our budget this year with COVID and everything else. One of the problems that we have is that, as I said at the beginning, we can't stop the number of cases that are coming into our system. And so what we have developed as part of our first phase of our three-phase plan, the budget requests of which the first phase we've made for fiscal year 2022, is sort of the minimum of what we need in order to be able to get started to start shoring up the crumbling infrastructure that we have that has been decades in the making. I am certainly happy to answer additional questions.
Thank you. I think we'll wait till, we'll give Joseph a chance to submit his testimony, and then we'll take a few questions after that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, we have Joseph Molina, Kansas Bar Association.
Thank you. Joe Molina with the Kansas Bar Association. The one thing I found very interesting about hand sanitizer is it finds all your little paper cuts. Well, we're here today in full support of the BID's request for their budget. It's pretty simple. When we talk about the Board of Indigent Defense Services, we're talking about the 6th Amendment of the Kansas Constitution. And in this case, it is very important because for the judicial system, especially the criminal justice system, to work, you not only need prosecutors, but you need defense attorneys. Without both of them, nothing happens, right? Cases stack up, right? Some criminals who may go to jail don't, and we end up with quite a bit of a problem. Last week, House Judiciary actually heard a bill, 2078. That's about how we would deal with the backlog of criminal cases. The last number I heard, there are 1,700 jury trials for criminal defendants that we have a backlog for. If you just think about that, we're going to need public defenders and prosecutors for both of them. And you just heard from the executive director of BIDS that they don't have the resources they need. And this is a backlog. These things will not be lessened unless we address them. These people are not going anywhere, right? They need to actually have a trial. And that's why the Bar Association is very interested in supporting the BIDS budget. It is a large number. It is a very large number. But in this day and age, some action needs to take place. And I urge you to look at their budget and see what can be done to help them. And when we're talking about the appointed counsel, many of those individuals are my members. And $80 an hour is not what it actually feels like, because that barely covers our private counsel overhead. And so what we're seeing is less and less people being on the being on those boards to take those types of cases. There was a time 20, 30 years ago where certain jurisdictions, every lawyer in that jurisdiction could be appointed counsel. That number has dropped dramatically just because it is nearly financially unacceptable to be taking $80 an hour. The Kansas Bar Association, a couple years ago, we did an economic survey of law. And we're looking at, on average, over $200 per hour for private counsel. So that is significantly more they can make on other cases and spend their time on other cases and not take any public defender types of cases. So that's something that actually needs to be brought up. I know we're running late on time, and you have questions for Heather Cessna. I appreciate it, you guys meeting with us. I appreciate you guys taking the time, and I urge you to take a hard look at the BIDS thing and see what we can do to help them out. Thank you. Stand for any questions.
Thank you, Joseph. While he's up there, any questions for Joseph? Senator Kirshen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know, but what's the criteria for getting a public defender? Is there you just say, I need a public defender, and you automatically get one, or how's that work?
Yes, sir.
This is Heather Cessna, for those who may be listening online. We actually have an application process, and the judges have to take into account their assets, their debts, their obligations like child support and things like that. And they make that decision based on the affidavit that the client has to submit and based on the federal poverty guidelines. And then what happens is if they have any questions about that, they can hold an evidentiary hearing on that question before they appoint counsel.
Senator Fagg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering, as far as caseload trends, you know, he said 1,700. Has this been building over the years? Is this getting a clog that's getting worse, or is it kind of wondering where trying to get a trend to it?
It's a little bit of caseload trends continuing to go up. It's also that in order to handle a case now, as opposed to what it took to handle a case 10 or 15 years ago, has expanded exponentially as far as the kind of time commitment that you have to make as defense counsel. And that's partially because of scientific evidence, that's an increase in body camera footage, and a lot of those sorts of aspects of criminal defense that we just didn't have as much of 10 to 15 years ago. So it's both a combination of increasing trends and then also the increase in just the labor intensiveness of the process.
Yes, Senator Fagg?
What type of cases? You know, when you talk 1,700, is there 1,400 of them that's a certain kind that's getting where? I just wondered what type of cases.
Right now, those cases we're looking at, the last I understood was they were all felony cases.
Felony.
The worst of the worst type of cases. So.
Senator Petty?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know you mentioned in your presentation that about in the 3rd district that they just stopped taking cases, and so there was a 170-day moratorium there. So how does that impact speedy trial action?
Well, and that's a very good question. This year, obviously, since statutory speedy trial has been suspended, it's been less of an issue. Certainly what it does involve in a normal year would be a whole lot of triaging. What ends up happening is it is very rare for our public defenders to close down for like 172 days all at once. So what they end up doing is they either close down partially, like we will only take lower level felonies for like, you know, felonies to the very level 10s through 3s or something like that for a period of time, or they'll shut down to, or refuse to take all felony cases for like a month, and then they'll open back up again. And during that period of time, those cases are then assigned out to the assigned counsel program. The problem that we're having is that because we are having to increase our use on that assigned counsel program, because in order to ethically control our caseloads, we've had to shut down our public defender's offices and have them refuse cases for so many more days as a result of these caseload problems and a lack of staffing to handle those cases, is that we've really been putting a lot of pressure on our assigned counsel, and as a result of that, we've been driving a lot of those assigned counsel off our lists because they also have to control their cases. So it becomes a speedy trial issue if we can't get enough attorneys to stay on those lists to take those cases as backup when we have to shut those down because those cases can't move forward with defense counsel. Now, that tends to, like I said, right now would be more of a constitutional speedy trial issue, but on a normal year, it would also be a statutory speedy trial issue.
Just as a follow-up, if we were looking at, I know you figured this on going up to $100 an hour. If we were looking at $90 an hour, would we be looking at half of that amount, or would that be a possibility of looking that way?
Certainly that's a figure that we could figure out for you if you'd like us to kind of like prorate that back. And actually, just to dogtail on your original question about the $100 an hour rate, our $80 an hour statutory rate was set up in 2006. And what happened was then in 2010, 2011, as a result of some of the economic downturn, we had to prorate that all the way back to $62 an hour because we didn't have the funds to be able to pay our assigned counsel. And we slowly were able to raise that back up again. This year was the first year that we were able actually to get back up to that $80 per hour rate. The problem is that we're competing with both private paying clients that are paying closer to $225, $250, or our federal public defenders that are paying $140 an hour for their assigned counsel.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you. Appreciate your testimony, Heather.
I appreciate it.
I think I don't know, do you guys want to deliberate this? I have a Zoom that I'm 15 minutes late on. You want to just, is it okay with the committee if we waited to deliberate this? Okay. We'll do it maybe even, I'll see if we can do it maybe tomorrow after our committee meeting. Thank you. With that, we're adjourned. Thank you.